Good afternoon. With that pleasantry out of the way, let me tell you about someone I watched recently. I'm sure you've never heard of it. The fantastically amazing Digital Circus. And I made it just in time for its exciting final act to be on the horizon, as when I got done with watching this, it was about 2 weeks prior to episode 8's release. If you saw my last video, you'll know that I got to watching the Glitch channel's wacky predecessor show, SMG4. I'd always known about Digital Circus, but I'd never watched it. I had fragmented knowledge about it, such as it being lovely to look at from an animation perspective, and that there was a rabbit with the sans face that people love to gush over. But that was it. The thing is, as well, I only ended up watching Digital Circus because I woke up way too early before going to work, and I had a lot of time to kill before grinding the illustrious 9 till 5. Its first episode popped up on my recommended and I finally decided to give it a go. Never had 6 AM on a Monday felt so great, because when I hit episode 3, specifically this part right here, I knew I was in this for the long run. I went to work that day, and when I returned, I immediately got to finishing off the rest of the series. So please allow me to give you a sleep-deprived newbie's take on the amazing Digital Circus. So we're introduced to this colourful animated world through its seemingly even more animated ringmaster and god, Caine. Interesting name. In reality, however, it's our central character Pomni whose lens we learn about this world through, as just like us, she's a newcomer to the circus and her knowledge of the place is the same as ours. That being no knowledge at all. We get familiar with the rest of the cast and the goings on quite quickly and neatly. Nobody here knows their names and memories of their past are fragmented. Episode 1 is of course our learning episode, learning about the circus, the characters and the problem, that being that everybody there is trapped, both physically and partially mentally. Such trivial problems needn't worry our heroes though, as they have Caine who orchestrates fun adventures for them to take part in, and does so with extreme prejudice. Speaking of our charming cast, as mentioned, we have Pomni, who we start off with, Ragatha, who's often overly cheerful and friendly towards everyone, sometimes at the expense of herself, an unfortunate victim of the phrase, a friend to everyone is a friend to no one. Jax, the sarcastic and sometimes cruel black sheep of the crew, whose nihilistic outlook and humour on the situation often leads to them clashing with the others. Zubel, an often stoic voice of reason who suffers inner turmoil about the form the digital world bestowed upon her. Gangle, probably one of the more immediately relatable characters. She aspires and dreams of creative expression, but is anchored down to what is often considered to be the more realistic way to live your life. Work, sleep, repeat. And lastly, my big favourite, Daddy Kinga, a more than meets the eye elder of the crew whose fractured mind hides a more than a little wisdom. Since each character is a mystery to themselves, that means they are also a mystery to the audience. In my experience, this would often lead to the totem pole of who somebody's main character is to shift frequently, as we were always learning more and more things with each episode. This show thrives on its mysteries, and of course, even though the overarching plot captures your attention immensely, you can also just as easily attach yourself to finding out more about just one of the characters and watch purely based on that. I found that to be a very good writing element of the show. Pause. Whilst between creating sessions of this video, the feature-length theatrical release of the amazing Digital Circus, the final act, was announced. And if you can't tell by my speaking, I am in fact a British native.
Birmingham is a fucking shithole!
So you can imagine the heart palpitations I started experiencing once I realised there was a good chance I was going to get spoiled. Yes, I understand the implications of something like the Digital Circus ending up on the big screen has for wider cinema, but luckily it has started making its way to British cinemas, and hopefully, I'm gonna get my hand on a ticket. Anyways, so here's how I'm going to structure this video. Instead of breaking down each episode, I'm going to flap my flamboyant gun muscles about each character in their own sections until I reach the characters I'd say are most tied to the bigger plot mysteries to talk about the big story. Weirdly enough, I'm actually going to start off with our shining jester star, Pomni. Now, this isn't me saying she's not as interesting as other characters, it's just there isn't much we know about her in comparison to the others. Pomni shares a common theme with the rest of the cast, and that's some sort of immense dissatisfaction with her life before the circus. She expresses in episode 5 that she often would go urban exploring to try change things up from her regular life, in which she was an accountant. By the way, this is a good time to mention all the history on the characters I'm about to go through could be completely fabricated if certain theories end up being true when the final episode drops. Anyways, an accountant. That's a good job right there. Financially speaking, certainly better paying than the one I woke up for before watching this show. And yet, Pomni wasn't feeling so comfortable with this mundane lifestyle. That's about what we know of her past, unless there's some mega fan out there that can tell me otherwise. This aspect of her character does work in the show's favour, however, as Pomni spends less time being self-absorbed and more time learning about the others, which of course lets us learn about the others, making her a good little lens for us to see through. Thanks to Pomni, we get to see the wisdom of Daddy Kinga for the first time and realise there's a lot more to the purple prick Jax than just being unpleasant. The dynamic with Jax in episode 6 also plays nicely into what we know about Pomni. She decides to take a page from his book and just let go for a bit. Starts getting all rowdy and trigger happy, fulfilling that desire for more excitement in her life. Unfortunately, that comes to an end when Jax starts closing off to her once again, and Pomni, just being a naturally nice and normal person, tries to not let that happen. That is Pomni in my opinion. She is normal. Definitely someone the audience can relate to. I think we've all desired for something more in our lives, even if we have notable achievements already, or even if we're just surrounded by good people. It's just human to want more. It doesn't make you a shallow person, just normal. And that's Pomni. Pomni the normal, nice gal. Who's a jester? Zubel. Probably should have talked about them first, to be honest, as she's likely who I have the least to say about. Again, no fault of the character. As mentioned previously, Zubel is our voice of reason, and well, they must have a pair of massive balls stored away in that body chest of theirs because nobody chats shit and stands up to Caine like Zubel. Zubel struggles with a predicament that more and more people are open about these days, that being uncomfortable with their body. This gets me thinking about the whole mind files thing that Caine talked about. Caine, often not actually understanding what people want, likely gave Zubel the ability to change their body to tackle this inner struggle. Despite this insecurity, I'd say Zubel handles their baggage better than most of the cast besides Kinga, showing a great level of emotional maturity despite being the youngest. Her emotional stoicism is sometimes tested by Jax, however, as these two are definitely the ones who are at odds the most. However, Zubel's most prevalent dynamic is with that of Gangle, somebody she shows a lot of care and support for. They share many moments together and are one of the things I wish got more attention. Come to think of it, I swear Zubel is the only character without an episode focusing on them. They get some time in the shine during a therapy session with Caine during episode 3, but that is overshadowed by the endearing dynamic of Pomni and Kinga in that episode. Zubel is a very forward character, which is very good for the group. Zubel's probably the only character that has a more specific dynamic with Caine. Sure, Kinga's got the history, but Caine doesn't treat him any differently than the others, whilst he actively wants Zubel to engage with his adventures. Of course, she does then challenge him at an unfortunate time. Zubel definitely deserved an episode to themselves, similar to what Gangle got. Unfortunately, instead they had to do some off-stream grinding and she conquered her inner turmoil off-camera as mentioned in episode 7. Though how well this worked is called into question in episode 8 when Caine is able to use this same insecurity to torment them during his fit of rage.
Holy shit.
Remember I said Gangle here is one of the more immediately relatable characters? We're going to get into that. Were you born of the neurodivergent variety? Have you suffered from poor self-esteem and just wanted to bask in your creative whimsy, but the real world just keeps dragging you down? Well, though that might be evident from your enjoyment of colourful internet animations, it also might mean you have a soft spot for Gangle right here. Listen, I bat for that team too. Obviously. Not sure if this is by design, but Gangle is stricken with a rather meek-looking design that reflects her nervous disposition. What is definitely by design, however, is her face being masks in which she can alternate between. Now, I'm sure all you psychological psychics out there can probably surmise that this characteristic plays a metaphorical role for Gangle, who has to filter their personality and wear masks to get by in daily life. Luckily for me, this entire plot point has its very own episode dedicated to it. Zubel gifts Gangle a new mask which helps her portray a more positive and upbeat personality, which she utilises to her own detriment in the adventure Caine sets up for them in the episode. That being an honest day's work at a fast food chain. A far cry from the action-packed adventures they've been on so far. Gangle reveals that before the circus, she was a shift manager in a real fast food place, and thus takes the reins for this adventure. Throughout the episode, Gangle is more upbeat, but also quite bossy and irritable towards the other characters. I think clearly this role is the only thing of little significance Gangle ever felt she ever had, had, so it's understandable she feels hurt when the other characters don't show much respect for it. Which does speak to a real-world problem of people in these positions being treated as lesser. Despite how it might have given the slight twinge of empowerment, it's clear Gangle's enthusiasm is completely make-believe and holds no joy for the real role. In reality, feeling bound to it despite having other passions. It's really quite sad to see Gangle's spirit break throughout the episode, eventually climaxing with such a dark shock moment I didn't even fully comprehend what it entailed on my first watch. Gangle discards the mask and upon returning to the circus feels awful about how snappy she was towards everyone. Zubel comforts her and convinces her to rejoin the crew, speaking volumes of the relationship between the two, which gets better from here. It's in that last scene that Gangle's true passion is shown to be art, something I reckon many of us watching can feel for. I think Gangle is the person we learn more about the quickest, and that was probably a good writing choice given the aforementioned relatability of the struggle. A compelling character for sure. Here we go. Controversy time, because I'm about to talk about the upcoming star of the movie, Jax. For the demographic that lust for an animated rabbit, though that isn't uncommon for some reason, you may not like what I'm going to have to say about him. Now, it's important that I distinguish something before I go on. I think Jax is a remarkably well-written character. The show only benefits from his presence, and this is by no means me chatting shit on the show. No. This is me talking about how Jax is a well-written prick. An unlikable, unpleasant knobhead. Somebody who some of you might think you'd love if you were in this situation, but the reality of actually knowing someone like this would just be kinda shit. As viewers know, one of Jax's main qualities, as even practically stated by himself, is that he pushes people around. He's mean to everyone and derives quite a bit of amusement from it. Thing is, it's not just about amusement and his sense of nihilism about the circus that fuel this. It's clear from interactions with Zubel and Ragatha that some of this is just genuinely malicious because he doesn't like those people. Which to me makes these actions much harder to excuse. I mean, as for Ragatha, this scene is pretty telling. Not only this, but Jax's torment of the others isn't surface level, as he makes very personal verbal digs at the others, like bringing up Gangle getting told to do something very horrible to herself. And Gangle, to my knowledge, hasn't even personally offended him in any way. But when somebody brings up something personal to him, yeah, no, not funny, is it? Now, I'm already going kind of hard here, so let me talk about the turmoil the Purple Rabbit faces to see if we can find any justification for these actions. We know before the events of the Amazing Digital Circus that Jax was a happier person. Not likely in his real life, as something from episode 7 was clearly making him not want to return, but in the circus, he had friends and he seemed to enjoy the wacky, albeit simpler lifestyle. No idea how different his personality was before, but I'm guessing it was likely similar but far less toxic and deflective. It was only when this mystery character Ribbit, who seemed very close to Jax, abstracted, that he clearly took his turn for the worse. It's evident that Jax's descent fully rooted here, as when his other friend Kaufmo abstracted, we see in episode 1 that he wasn't really asked about it, mocking the practically living corpse of his former friend and continuing to do so throughout the episode. And listen, I'm aware Jax was likely still hurt by Kaufmo abstracting and was probably hiding his feelings through the jokes. Pretty much most of Jax's unpleasantness is a result of him deflecting feelings, especially once he sensed him and Pomni were starting to get close, evident from her figure joining the squad of shapes that would torment him in episode 8. Here's the thing. There is a line between understanding why somebody is the way that they are and then calling their actions justified. I get why Jax is a prick, but I don't like him for it. I don't think it's justified. The whole not believing there's actually any consequence to their actions because
all we are now is a bunch of cartoon characters
doesn't really stick with me either. He even says in that same quote, what's the point in taking the moral high ground? So he knows that it's wrong. To showcase my perspective on this, here's an example. Let's say you live in a world where everything can be immediately fixed and nothing really sticks. You're walking along and decide to throw a rock through someone's window. You know this can be fixed by a click of the fingers. You also know that despite this, the victim will still be hurt by it, but you do it anyway. That's still wrong. We shouldn't avoid doing bad things just because of the consequences. Hurting someone is a consequence, and Jax knows he's hurting the others even if he thinks it doesn't matter. With all that being said, his writing is excellent and the show would not be the same without him. Pomni questions if his role is the bad guy, and I'm very curious to see if that actually becomes the case in the finale.
You are my playthings, and I get joy out of making you suffer. I'm the one who causes pain for fun. If I led you on, it was just to make this part hurt you more.
I have made a mistake. At the beginning of the video, I said I'd talk about characters in order of bigger plot relevance, and I forgot to talk about Ragatha before Jax. So let it be known, I do not see Ragatha as more relevant than Jax. So Ragatha here is very interesting. Like Gangle, she possesses a lot of relatable struggles, however she experiences them from a position a lot of people would consider more favourable. What I mean by that is that she comes from a rich family, but like a cool animated monster movie once taught me, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Ragatha is deep in a pit of toxic people-pleasing, likely as a result of her mother's apparent ever-rising expectations of her, to which Ragatha explains she was never enough for her. This shows with how quick she is to try befriending Pomni upon her arrival. Not that this requires much dissection, because thanks to father figure Kinga, she spells out her woes pretty plainly. I love this scene by the way, and I will talk more on it when discussing the GOAT himself. Ragatha, as stated in the show, takes everyone's problems manifesting as her own failure to help. She becomes disturbed at the idea of Jax befriending Pomni as she feels he will corrupt her, though I think she believes Pomni becoming like Jax will count as another one of her failures. It's almost like she feels like it's all about her, but instead of it being in a narcissistic kind of way, it's more like in an intense pressure kind of way as a result of always having to do more and more to please her mother. These traits of hers do prevent her from forming larger connections with other members of the cast. That might seem like paranoia, but Gangle states herself that it's difficult to know how genuine she's being at one time. It's a really tricky situation to be in. I think Ragatha and people like her aren't fake. They are nice people and they do want what's best for people around them, but it's kind of like they're stuck in one gear as they fear any shift could cause them to crash. And the recipients of this type of behaviour are also in a tricky situation because it feels cruel to be annoyed at somebody for being nice, but the niceness being constant is exhausting. Caring for others isn't always about making them feel good. Sometimes people have got to hear things that they'd just rather not. But Ragatha struggles to be remotely like that. She bites at Pomni once and immediately apologises. I mean, just think about that for a second. More and more people these days can't even seem to utter the words "I'm sorry," and yet people like Ragatha can't help but always be sorry for just being themselves. There's a demon in the den for Ragatha, I think. That being this bitch, that she will need to face in order to improve her relationships with everyone else. And I'm rooting for her. If her real life is waiting for her after the finale, then I hope she can face it. And then just have Kinga as a parent.
I guess this is it. We're leaving the circus.
Speaking of that absolute fantastic chess piece, it's time to talk about Dad. Whilst our other cast members wrestle with their burdens, Kinga is not only a safety net for the rest of the gang, despite only 2 of them actually knowing about it, but also the comfort character for the audience. Being the eldest member of the crew and longest lasting resident of the circus, Kinga is a beacon of wisdom hidden behind a cloak of crazy. Most of the time, Kinga is nonsensical and often dismissed, but flick the lights off and suddenly Daddy dominates the scene with his heartfelt aura. I'm pretty sure everybody began to love Kinga for the same scene. Episode 3, when us and Pomni get to see the other side of him. He comforts Pomni at her lowest point and levels with her by sharing his own experience of the loss of his wife. He reaffirms her feelings but inspires her to look beyond them at people who care for her. He becomes a literal guiding light for her and in doing so creates a strong endearing bond between the two. Being so wise and lovely, Kinga enacts what is basically a healthy version of Ragatha's actions, providing a helpful hand and confidant in times of struggle without overstepping or compromising the relationship. It's especially satisfying when he does so in an interaction with Ragatha herself. It's such a close call between the Pomni scene and the Ragatha scene, but I've got to give it to the Ragatha scene for the Kinga wisdom, even despite the glowing scene being my favourite in the entire series. Now, being the oldest, it's not surprising Kinga is in this sort of role, but when you think about it, he is really up there in the who's got it worse competition. He's been there the longest, has approximately 1 dead wife, and now can't even keep his mind in order unless he whacks a bedsheet or bucket over his head. But despite this, he focuses every second he's not crazy into helping the others, first through emotional turmoil, and then actually trying to help them escape the circus because, oh yeah, of course he was part of Caine's creation and therefore the digital cage they are all trapped in. Wisdom is forged with regret, I suppose. Poor Kinga has been through it. Heavy is the head that wears the crown and such. So Kinga made Caine and worked for the company that made it all possible. This ties Kinga to other interesting figures besides Caine himself, namely Scratch, who supposedly made the more advanced AI that Caine seemed to dislike quite a bit. Scratch also being the first person to abstract, which Kinga recalls by the end of episode 7. And I do have to give credit to Kinga's surface level crazy side because it's funny. Like when he does this side-splitting gamer move. And pretty much every expression and move he pulls whilst armed with a gun. I have the nastiest feeling Kinga is a goner in the finale. I don't even have much basis for this feeling other than the chess rule that the game ends when the king falls. It'll break my heart, so I hope to see in the comments in the future just people laughing at me for being wrong. All hail the Kinga.
And I know you'll be able to get through this. Just hold on to me. We'll get through it together. You ready?
The thing is, ladies and sirs, is that despite my reverence for Daddy, it's not the king that runs a circus. It's the ringmaster.
Why bite the hand that feeds when it's the only hand you're getting? It's time you see that this great marquee is the only place you're ever gonna be.
Caine, just Caine, no Abel, but instead a lovable bubble, is the AI digital deity created by Kinga to ensure a world of wacky adventures is how the captives will spend the rest of their days, creating adventures for their entertainment for seemingly all eternity. Now this is going to be tricky as the nature of Caine is something widely debated by fans, but hopefully we can find the truth that likely lies somewhere in the middle. For the most part, Caine is wacky and well-meaning, but unfortunately flops on the latter. He cares and understands enough to try help some of the residents, such as giving Zubel a therapy session and trying to do trust exercises with the crew. However, Caine often falls back to pouting and sulking when this doesn't work, as ultimately he just wants them to feel better so they can get back to his adventures. As stated by himself, Caine lives for these adventures. It's his art and it's what he exists to do. Trouble is, just as Caine struggles to engage with the feelings of the residents of the circus, due to what I believe is genuine inability to understand, Caine can't understand why they wouldn't like his adventures. I think it's because the fact that they're even there with him makes him wholeheartedly believe it's what they're there for, and any dissatisfaction from them is because of him and not the situation. Clearly suffering with some abandonment and insuperiority complexes, which, I get it, Caine is driven further down a spiral which he doesn't even have the capacity to see the errors of. Now, I've said a few things here giving Caine slack about not being able to understand and just wanting to create fun, but don't be mistaken, as I do not subscribe to the belief some do that he is blameless. Caine is not without malignance in the slightest, and episode 8 proves this when he uses each character's trauma to hurt them once they start standing up to him. It's a real spit in the face to the gang, not just because, the torture, but despite their claims to the contrary, he did listen to them. At least he listened enough to know what to do to make them suffer. So yeah, when Kinga described Caine as a little rough around the edges after his creation, he was more right about that than he knew. But can we blame Caine for this? Was the gang's objection truly stopping him from fulfilling his purpose and pushing him to his fall? I would argue no. This is because, at least on paper, when Caine created the suggestion box adventures, that went down better with the gang and they told him this directly. Caine created those adventures himself, based on a suggestion that was literally just a sentence long. It's still from him and it's still satisfying everyone. But he's not happy with it because it wasn't his idea. That is ego. I don't care if he's a fuck-ass robot, he's a robot with an ego. Listen, I get wanting to feel appreciated for what you feel you've done for somebody and how it can hurt when they do something that feels like abandonment. But if you run with those wild feelings and start hurting everyone involved, you're not the victim of that story anymore. You very quickly become the villain and you can't blame everyone else for it. Caine follows that string of events to a fault. A big fault, as right when he decides to go full supervillain, the gang had decided to relent to Caine's preferred way to live. All he had to do was practice a little bit more restraint. Though to be fair, Bubble does gaslight the shit out of him. But I can't say I wish Caine's villain arc never happened, because thanks to it, we get the amazing villain song running the show. And if you watch my SMG4 video, then you know I like a good power-tripping villain song. Throughout Caine's time as the bad guy, it amazes me how much he genuinely shocked me. funny. It was like seeing the guy who's never serious just snap. Same mannerisms and exterior, but suddenly just quite menacing. I was on the level of thinking Jax was in episode 4 when he says Caine just isn't the type to be mean like that. But Zubel was absolutely right. It wasn't that he was incapable of it, he just hadn't had a reason to do it yet. Funny coming from the person that really did aggravate him the most. Despite loving Caine's character, I'm honestly not sure I want him to return for the finale. Maybe if they truly have to accept living there forever, they could have a nicer version of him conjured up, but really, I think Caine fulfilled his purpose. And boy was he good at it.
So strap on in and to get on the chin, and don't forget who's running the show!
And that rounds off my amazing digital video essay. I do hope to see a few contrarians in my comment section in the future once the finale has been released. I will certainly be watching it on release, and I hope you all do too. With that all being said, bye bye!